Good morning. Glad to be with you this morning. Good to see your faces. Good to see the camera of the faces that are represented out there. We're glad that you're with us as well. Today we're going to be talking about the spiritual excellence superhighway. Now, those of you who are around in the 90s and the 2000s, you remember in our culture there was a lot of discussion about the pursuit of excellence. There's a lot of books written about 7 habits of highly effective people and in pursuit of excellence and all of those kinds of things. And I suggest to you that we've given up in this culture the pursuit of excellence, and we have replaced it with the pursuit of acceptance or mediocrity. That doesn't work for you and me. We have been given a challenge to the greatest establishment of excellence that is to become Christ-like. There is no greater standard of excellence, and there is no greater calling than to emulate Him. I want to begin this morning by telling you a story of the most insightful, intuitive person I have ever met. And his name is Supreme Grandmaster George Ng. Now, when I first met Master Ng, he was not a Supreme Grandmaster. He was simply a master of Kung Fu. He had a red sash. In Kung Fu, there are no belts. You're either a white sash of a student or you're the black sash of a master. And when you've been a master for 20 years, you received an honorary red sash, which he had. An amazing man. I was attending Oklahoma Christian. I was a freshman at Oklahoma Christian way back in none of your business. And I had a suite mate at OC that was studying Kung Fu. At that time, Master Ng was teaching microbiology. He was raised in China, Shaolin trained as a ultra-traditional Kung Fu master. Came to the United States, was only one of 3 at the time who was teaching Kung Fu to what we would call Occidentals. Because in China, they viewed you and me as being very brutal, very bloodthirsty, very all the opposite of what Kung Fu was. And they were very suspicious of teaching martial arts to Americans, especially. Because their view of us was the Wild West, the Civil War, all of those kinds of things. He was one of 3 that was doing that in the United States, happened to be in Shawnee, Oklahoma, teaching at St. Gregory University, teaching, as I said, microbiology. Did not charge his students. To him, teaching Kung Fu would be much like evangelism to you and me. However, he was selective of his students. Because as he had done back in China, if you wanted to learn Kung Fu, you would go to the monastery. Remember, they started out as priests. You would go to the monastery and you would sit outside the gates for however long it took. Now, you could do that as a child. You might sit there for weeks. And they would watch you. You didn't know you were being assessed, but they would watch you. They would watch how you dealt with the rain. They would watch how you dealt with the cold wind. And you would sit there not knowing they're watching you, but all the time they're assessing you. They're assessing if you have what it takes to even be taught before they even open the gates and let you into the monastery. Well, my suite mate, I was asking him all kinds of questions about his training. And he said, well, Steve, you seem really interested in this. Why don't you consider going with me to Shawnee twice a week, Tuesday nights from 6 to 9, Thursday nights from 6 to 9 to be trained? He said, however, if you're interested, I will talk to Master Ng and see if he will interview you, which happened. So on a Thursday night, I was invited by Grandmaster George Ng to come to Shawnee, to the basement of St. Gregory's University where this all took place. And he had me watch what was going on. This was on a Thursday night. And on Thursday night, Tuesday night was strength training and stretching and all that kind of stuff. Thursday night was actually learning how to kick, throw punches, all of those kinds of things, plus sparring, where 2 students would be pitted against one another to challenge each other's skills. And he had me watch that. So I sat off to the side watching that, not knowing that for 3 hours he was assessing me as I was watching what was going on. After 3 hours, it was time for my interview. He interviewed me for an hour. In the first several moments, he asked me questions about myself. He asked me about my goals. He asked me why I had come, what was my interest in learning Kung Fu. And then he did the most amazing thing that has ever been done to me in this vein in my life. He started telling me about me. And he started out saying, Mr. Parker, you have these strengths. And he described strengths that I had. Then he took the rest of the time, which seemed like a week, and told me my weaknesses and my frailties. Now, if you look at the picture behind the heading, I've stylized this so kids could see it and not really understand it. But what you see is what happened to my mind and my soul. I was on the end of the spear. Guys, he filleted me. He laid me open. Here is who you are. And it was brutal. He wasn't mean. He was just open and honest. This was part of the assessment. I didn't know that. I was so dazed and confused. Had he read my diary, he would not have known me better than he did just this short time that we were together. At the end of the interview, he asked me a question, Mr. Parker, why should I teach you Kung Fu? And in my head, I was laying on the floor, filleted open and bleeding. And my answer was, Master Ng, I want to apologize to you. I have wasted 3 hours of your time being here. I have wasted an hour of your time to interview me. I have nothing. I can offer you nothing. I'm not particularly all that intelligent. I am not very athletic. I don't even know why I came here. Master Ng, I apologize for wasting your time. And he gave me a smile. And the reason I could tell the smile is just the corner of his mouth turned up just a little bit. And he said, is the way he always taught. And as we were training, he'd walk up around us and he would talk. And he had these phrases. And he said, Mr. Parker, a cup's usefulness is in its emptiness, because you can add nothing to a full cup. You bring me an empty cup. I will see you Tuesday at 6 p.m. I walked away totally undone, totally exposed to myself. But I had determined I'm going to listen to everything that man says. I want to know what he knows. It was about 6 to 8 weeks later. He called my name on a Thursday night to come up and spar. It's 6 to 8 weeks. I didn't know squat about what we were doing. He called my name to come up and spar, and he called one of his top students, one of his instructors. I thought I had done something wrong. I thought I'm about to be punished. Now, what saved my life was we didn't do full contact sparring. There were 3 rounds, and I'm up against this amazing student and thinking I've really done something wrong, and now I'm being punished. Master Ng stood between us. We bowed to him, then we bowed to one another, as you've seen, and then he would say, start. And then when one student overwhelmed the other, he'd yell out, stop! And you had to stop immediately. Guess who the one getting overwhelmed was? I kid you not. For 3 rounds, here's how it went. Begin. Stop! Because I was ready to be destroyed. And in the midst of this, I'm like, what's this proving? Begin. Stop. Come back together, bow to one another. Begin. Stop. Because I'm getting killed here. After the third round, we both started to go back to sit on the floor and remain, face. So we turned to the students. He walked and stood beside me and said, "This student stayed in his form and in his stance, even though he was being overwhelmed." He walked to the other student, one of his prized students, and said, "This student stood out of his form and left his stance in the presence of overwhelming victory." He walked back to me and said, "One of these days, this student will defeat this student because he stays in his stance." Remember what I told you. I am going to learn everything that this man can teach me. And that is, stay in your stance. Never leave form. That's what he was teaching. And as we left that night, one of the few times I ever talked to him one-on-one, as we left that night, we were leaving, I was getting my stuff together, and we were leaving the room together. He turned and said, "Mr. Parker, that's what I saw in you that first night." Brothers and sisters, to make it to the superhighway of excellence, we must adopt what I call the righteousness obsession. Obsessed with righteousness. If you look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 6, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied, they shall be filled." Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I am obsessed. I will not be satisfied until I've achieved, not grace, that comes from him, righteousness. That's my pursuit. Jesus had that righteousness obsession. John chapter 4, verse 31. "In the meanwhile, the disciples were requesting him, saying, 'Rabbi, eat.' But he said to them, 'I have food to eat that you don't know anything about.' Disciples therefore were saying to one another, 'No one's brought him food, have they?' Jesus said to them, 'My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work.'" Obsession with righteousness. Obsession with fulfilling his destiny. Obsession with knowing his destiny. One of my favorite lifetime quotes comes from Socrates, who said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Now, I want to warn you something about the unexamined life. It's painful. It can be incredibly painful. But I want you to know the unexamined life is not worth living. And so often do we see folks not willing to examine their life because they're not in pursuit of excellence. They're in pursuit of mediocrity. 1 Corinthians 13, "For we know in part, we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away with. When I was a child, I used to speak as a child, think as a child, reason as a child. When I became a man, put away childish things, did away with them. For now we see in a mirror dimly. Now we see ourselves dimly. But then face to face, I know in part, but then I shall know fully, just as I have been fully known." Now, if you believe with many authors that in this context he's talking about God's full revelation, when we have Scripture and its fulfillment, when the complete is here, then I will be able to know as I am fully known. And guys, Scripture sometimes is painful to our self-revelation, isn't it? I remember the days very well when the mark of a good sermon, when people would come up and say, "Boy, you really stomped all over my toes," and they would say it with a smile. Rather than just saying, "Wow, that really hurt. You always enjoy being that brutal?" That's what Scripture does to it. It shows us ourselves. Until God reveals himself, we can't really see ourselves, at least not in the way that he sees us. So the first step in this process, and there are three, the first step in this pursuit of excellence, of spiritual excellence, is honest self-evaluation. introspection. Now, if you want to take this to the next level, this is mutual. This is accountability. This is doing it with one another. This is what Master Ng did with me, is bearing our souls to one another. It's answering very fundamental questions like, who am I? Or what am I? What am I really like? Master Ng started me on a path of introspective self-gutting. And I don't enjoy it. But I like the outcome of it. Guys, I'm 65 years old and I'm still doing this. You know, a reality of the answer to the question, who am I or what am I? One of the realities that came to me is I hadn't been a good friend. When I was growing up, my dad worked for a company that worked for NASA, and we moved a lot. To my sister, that was tough because that meant being uprooted. To me, it was an adventure. Every couple of years, we were able to go make new friends. And I never had a trouble making friends, so I knew I would have new friends everywhere I went, and I could add that to my stable of friends. We'd get new adventure and all of those kinds of things. My dad realized when I got to junior high, we need to settle down. So he took a job, a different kind of job. We moved to Dallas. But even in Dallas, in 4 years of high school, I went to 3 different high schools. In 4 years of college, I went to 3 different colleges. Moving around was, to me, an adventure. Even if we settled down, I was still doing that. And one of the things that I found out about myself is, and guys understand, I think this is part of the personality that God gave me in order to do what I do, which is from time to time I've had to move to different places, work with different congregations, move to Seattle and plant a church, leave everybody we knew, go up there and plant a church. Now to do that, you've got to live in the present. You don't live in the past. You don't hold on to past associations or friendships. You don't lose them as friends, but what you lose is contact. Can you relate to what I'm talking about? Because you contact the people that you're around. I've always been someone who either lives in the present or all ahead full. I don't look back. And you know what that means? I've left a lot of people that I love dearly, and I don't stay in contact with them. That's not my idea of a good friend. It's my personality. I don't really like that about myself. And in the last couple of months, I have been going and dredging up relationships of people that I love. You know the kind of people I'm talking about. You can leave for years, and when you step back into their lives, it's like time didn't pass. You know what I'm talking about? But time did pass, and I did not express to them during that time that I loved them. Did they know I did? Yes, they did. And that's evident of the fact you could walk back in. And guys, I can go from congregation to town, all the places we've been. I can give you a long list of people whom I love dearly, many of which I left behind and left alone. And one of the messages they got from that is, he loves me, he just doesn't need me. I saw some cruelty, not intended. And I know what you're saying, well, don't everybody do that? That's not the point. Isn't friendship a two-way street? Can't they do the same thing? Not the point. The point is being the best friend, being the best brother that I can be. And the downside of a personality that God gave me, and I think every strength has a downside, every downside has a potential strength, but to look at myself and say that. So I have started going back and revisiting friendship. And I will call folks on the phone, and I've gotten used to hearing the phone hit the floor. I hadn't heard from you in years. And now that hurts. Before it was just, yeah, I know, time gets away, all that kind of stuff. Now it hurts when they say that. Because I know exactly what they're saying. Who are we? Who am I? How can I be more Christ-like? But this step is where culture stops. You see, we're very much into a self-actualization, self-realization, self-healing, self-acceptance, self-gratifying, self-acknowledging self. Our culture is about the acceptance of everything, especially my flaws, right? It's not the pursuit of excellence. It's accepting my bad habits. It's accepting my bad qualities. It's accepting the thing. In fact, to suggest to someone the possibility of improvement is called shaming now in our culture. Our culture is obsessed with not being obsessed with the pursuit of excellence. As Christians, we don't have that option because we're called to be like Christ. The culture accepts mediocrity because it requires no effort. You don't have to change. However you're born, we're taught we got to accept you that way. Whatever you do, we got to accept you that way. And yes, God does take me just as I am, but He does not leave me there. And He doesn't call me to stay there. It's a tough step. It's not just, let me tell you the good things about myself, and Master Ng did that. Now let me tell you something about Ron White, the comedian of blue collar fame, was talking once about getting remarried. And his wife, and he talked about the comparison of going and performing live, and people just thought he was the greatest thing. Then he comes home to his new bride, and she's, let me tell you some things about you that you don't know. And they weren't good. The second stage is what I call self-recrimination. That's a painful term. Self-recrimination is the jarring look into the darkness of one's own soul. Master Ng forced me to look at my darkness. Guys, I believe this is one of life's most painful processes for you and me. Because we get very angry if somebody else suggests these things about me. If people see or hint that they can see into the darkness of my soul, I get defensive. I don't want to talk about it, or I'll change the subject, may even get upset. And we play games with God, don't we, in our prayers? And we don't confess who we really are to Him. And we think if we don't, He won't notice. And He does because He shows it to us. Rarely do we think in terms of inviting an inventory of our weaknesses. In fact, we fear such suggestion would lead to our undoing. If you show me who I really am, warts and all, I'll be undone. What I want you to understand, it does not lead to our undoing, it leads to our becoming. And that's the point of it. Psalm 139:23, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. And see if there be any hurtful way in me. And lead me in the everlasting way. David is saying, gut my heart and show me what's in there. Especially the darkness, especially the anxiety. Show it to me. And then show me how to be. Show me who to be. Romans 7, passage that was read earlier. I won't review the whole thing because it was read very well. The very things I want to do, I don't do. The very things I don't want to do, I do. And then at the bottom, oh, wretched man that I am. And it's one thing to go through the experience. Paul's gutting himself in our presence. Paul's bearing it for everyone. David bared it for everyone. Show me the darkness in me. If you've got the guts, pray that. If you've got the courage, if you've got a passion for excellence, pray it. And He'll show you. He'll send you a Master Ng to say, let me tell you some things about you that you don't know. He'll show you yourself. And I want you to understand that the advent of this, the outcome of this, is amazing. Proverbs, Solomon describes wisdom as a female, personifies her. Turn to my reproof. Do you like that word reproof? Reproof means to be called on the carpet. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. Because I called you, you refused. I stretched out my hand, no one paid attention. You neglected all my counsel. You did not want my reproof. I will even laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your dread comes. God says, I'm crying out. Listen to my reproof. Why? Is he wanting to just fillet us? Is he wanting to hurt us? No, he wants us to be like him. And the first step is I've got to make an assessment of myself. The second one is I have got to incriminate myself. This is where Steve is dark. This is where Steve fails. This is where Steve hurts people. This is where Steve sins. And wisdom is saying, if you will accept my reproof, you will achieve wisdom. Not just wisdom. You will become like the God that you adore. Isn't that our goal? I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. And my tongue cleaves to my jaws. And thou dost lay me in the dust of death. David speaking about himself, speaking about Jesus, who was recriminated on behalf of you and me. You'll never find anybody who achieves, especially anybody who achieves to become a spiritual giant, living letters. You'll never find them that don't practice self-assessment, honest, insightful self-assessment, self-recrimination. It's a demonstration of incredible strength. I want to remind you, when Socrates stated the unexamined life is not worth living, he was on trial for corrupting young people's mind, teaching them the very same thing. If you know anything about Socrates' history, he was killed for doing this. Our culture doesn't like this. Humans don't like to do this. It is what's laid at our feet. But why would anyone pursue the pain of self-recrimination? Because only an empty cup can be filled. Only when we say, I'm undone, can God say, now I can go to work. Only when we're willing to lay our gutted, bleeding heart at his feet can he mold that heart into his heart, as he did with David, who recriminated himself, not just in the presence of God, but in the presence of Israel and in your presence. And God made him a man after his own heart. Why would anybody pursue the pain of self-recrimination? For the third stage, which is self-transformation. Now you understand, self-transformation is not self at all. It's God transformation, but it happens within the self. This is the good stuff. This is the achievement. This is the step toward excellence, when you know, I have made a step. I am now more Christ-like. Now let me ask you, and again, what I told you about the bad side of me being a friend, I'm not a real good friend in some ways. Now understand, because my personality is different, this is something I have to be conscious of, and it's never going to come to me naturally. Let me ask you, leaving friends for 10, 15, 20 years that I don't talk to, or calling them and saying, I'm thinking about you, I care about you, tell me what's going on in your life. Which is more Christ-like? It's self-evident, isn't it? I worked with a man in Seattle, Roy Vaughn, member of the church, mentor, trained me to become a craftsman in plumbing, taught me about life and so many other things. We moved back to the South. Christmas, I would send him and Joe, beautiful godly couple, I would send them a Christmas gift. I would send them something to eat because it was one of his favorite things to do. I would send them goodies. Then after about 5 years, Steve came back. After about 10 years, Roy called me one day and said, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, why?" I had heard from him for a while, but I hadn't heard from him in the last few years. "Is everything okay?" I hung up the phone and cried. I had abandoned my friend. 3 weeks ago, I called him. He's 93. He's dying. I called him, heard the phone drop. I attributed that to his weakness, not hearing my voice after all this time. And I said, "Roy, I love you. Called to tell you I love you. And I called to apologize for not being a good friend, for not being a better friend, for not being a good disciple, for not being a good follower, not being a good protege. I apologize, but I have never, ever, ever stopped loving you. And please don't interpret my not saying that as meaning that I don't." How do you think I felt when I hung up? That felt good. Because that's exactly what Christ would do. I was, by the gutting of God, I was demonstrating more Christ-likeness to Roy Vaughn, my mentor, than I had in years. And I felt good that the Spirit was doing something good in me. I felt more like I was being like Jesus. I felt more like I was being transformed by the Holy Spirit that lives in me. And this all comes through a choice to submit to the process. I'll close with 3 scriptures. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. "But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory." Excellence, brothers and sisters, just as from the Lord the Spirit. Through 3 steps: honest self-evaluation, self-recrimination, and then change, adaptation, growth, development, the pursuit of excellence, the pursuit of Christ-likeness, becoming a little more like Him, and experiencing the joy. I took a baby step by the power of God and the Spirit living in me to become a little more like Jesus. And all the pain of the recrimination is gone. It's replaced with the victory of the pursuit of excellence and being more like Him. Do not be conformed to this world. Look at how it's impacting you. Look at the imprint it has made on you. Recriminate yourself. You are like the world, but don't be conformed, but be transformed by the renewing. You've got to present the gutted mind before the mind can be transformed. 2 Corinthians 4, "Therefore we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day." That's what it's for. That development, that growth, that renewal, that excitement, that joy. I have discovered something about myself that I don't like. And God has taken that and He's changed it into something that is like His Son. That feels good. It is good. That is righteousness. That is the pursuit of excellence. Do you want it? There's a highway. I notice in the picture the highway's rough. This is a picture of Route 66, the old one. Hadn't been maintained very much in years. It's a rough road. But where it takes you is vistas like you could never see. Because you're seeing yourself and the world as God sees you. Are you ready to begin the pursuit of spiritual excellence? Are you ready to take up the mantle, having laid it down, of the pursuit of spiritual excellence? Will you be honest with yourself about yourself? Will you recriminate the things in you that need to change? Will you submit those to God and allow Him to change you to be conformed to the likeness of His Son? Can we help you do that this morning in a public way? If so, you're invited to come as we stand and sing together.